Hello, and welcome back to the Better Divorce Podcast. I'm Paulette Rigo, your host. Many years ago, I started this podcast as a radio show in Boston, and it's been a work of love and a labor of love to bring experts in their fields to you who are either contemplating divorce or managing divorce or trying to heal from divorce, or you're doing some research for a friend, wink, wink. But these topics are varied, and today we're going to talk about parenting. My guest, Erica Komisar, wrote a book called The Parent's Guide to Divorce. And if you think that might appeal to you or someone you know or love, grab your notebook and buckle up. So just a little bit about Erica. She has been in practice since 1990, so that's been a while. I can't even think about when I said 19 something. She's a contributing editor to the Institute of Family Studies, and Erica has been featured on Good Morning America, Fox and Friends, and featured in People magazine. And she lives in New York, a little close to my Northeast roots. So welcome to the show, Erica. I'm really glad you're here. It's a much needed topic.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So let's talk a little bit about you personally before we get into your genius zone of helping people through parenting. Obviously, a 36-year practice is significant, so did the math. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you love to help people do what you do.
Well, I'm a social worker and a psychoanalyst, and 10 years ago I wrote a book called Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. And it was basically about the importance of attachment security in 0 to 3 as the foundation for mental health. And then a few years later, I wrote a book called Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety, basically talking to parents about that critical period of brain development and how they can help their children with their mental health. And now I have this Parent's Guide to Divorce. Basically, I do what I do. I write books. When I don't have any books that I can recommend to my patients, my primary work is still my practice in New York and around the world. Since I write books now, it's remote, so I see people all around the world. But as a clinician who has specialized, you'd say all psychoanalysts are specialists in depression and anxiety, but I've specialized also in parent guidance. And so that means helping parents to understand their children, particularly if their children are starting to show any signs or symptoms that they may be in trouble. And, with the work that I do, I always like to think of prevention, not just of addressing problems. And so I write the books that I do not just to help parents deal with the problems they may be dealing with, but also to help them prevent issues and problems. So, we say that the best way to deal with mental health in children or mental illness in children is to prevent it. And so, yeah, that's my motivation. I take, I am a psychoanalyst, so I take an approach that really helps parents understand the origins of children's mental health issues, not just the symptoms, and to not just deal with the symptoms alone, but really to deal with the underlying psychosocial stressors and family issues, which really contribute to children having problems. So we say that the children are usually more the barometers of how a family is doing rather than the problem itself. So that's sort of what.
You make so many good points. We'll get to them all, or we'll try to. But I did want to get into a little bit about your initial comment about being a writer and an author, and how your idea of writing books comes from not finding a book about that topic. So saying to yourself, well, guess it's my calling to write a book about it. And I think I did something similar to it. Memoirs are a different whole category than either self-help books or more of a how-to book type of, or a guide type of book. But if you're talking about different categories or niches of book writing, I think that is a brilliant way to view it. I myself, when I was going through my own 8.5-year litigated case, took copious notes because I spent so much time in court. I would always just bring a notebook with me because my attorney told me to. He said,
Yeah.
take notes, take notes, take notes. And I'm a good note taker, apparently. I was a very good note taker in, elementary school, junior high, high school, college. And I apparently got very good at it after spending so much time in court. And by the end of it, I had a stack of spiral notebooks, black ones, of course, to try to look, a little bit more subtle, not like hot pink with neon green. And I realized, like, wow, I really have a bevy of knowledge here, of being able to witness other people's cases. Not that I wrote down details of their personal life, but I started to notice things that they did well and things that they didn't do well, mistakes that people had made, or maybe even success stories like, ooh, I made a note of that. And that's what turns into Better Divorce Blueprint. Of course, taking my own holistic background too, and natural health and wellness, complementary modalities of healing, but also being a yoga teacher, trainer, and a birth doula and a lactation consultant with macrobiotic and Ayurvedic background. I could look at it from a holistic point of view, but I could also look from it with, pearls, navy blue suit, attache case, stuck in a courtroom from that point of view too. So that's where it all came about. But I've never thought of it that way, the way you summarized how, hey, there's not a book on that topic. So you know what? I'm going to write it. So I love that. How many books have you written, and what are the titles, just so everybody knows?
Yeah, the first one is Being There, Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years Matters. The second one is Chicken Little, The Sky Isn't Falling, Raising Resilient Adolescents in the New Age of Anxiety. And the third one is The Parent's Guide to Divorce, which in the UK and Australia is called The Child Healthy Divorce. So 3 books, I guess you could say 4 books, but 2 of them are the same book with different titles, and that's how licensing works. Yeah, I mean, basically, each of the books that I wrote also had angles to them that were a little bit controversial. It's not, I didn't write them to be controversial, but sometimes in saying things that are just inconvenient truths today, you are saying things that are controversial. The first book, I was saying that, children under the age of 3 need their primary attachment figure, usually their mother, as much as possible, physically and emotionally in the first 3 years if you want them to be mentally healthy. And that's sort of an inconvenient truth today. The second book was really helping to educate parents about adolescence in a way that it taught them about brain development. And so not to blame their children, or to get, how to regulate their own emotions towards their adolescence by really understanding what their adolescents are going through. And also that adolescence is a much longer period of time than we knew. It's 9 to 25. So there's a bigger window where parents, if they weren't around in the first 3 years, they can repair a lot of what they didn't give their children in adolescence. It's what we call the second critical period of brain development. And this book really was because I saw so many divorcing families in my practice who were doing it so poorly that their children were really the sort of collateral damage, the victims of the divorces. As you know, because you went through a divorce, divorce does not bring out the best in people. It's pain, and pain doesn't bring out the best in people. It doesn't bring out the best in the adults in the room. And so if the adults cannot regulate their own feelings of anger and sadness and pain, then they end up expressing it often in such a way that the children are the victims rather than protecting them and keeping them at the center of it. So this book was really a book to talk about attachment security and why, if you can help it, don't divorce in the first 3 years, because your children really shouldn't be pulled apart in the first 3 years. They need that stability in that critical period of brain development. And then after that, to really prioritize not fairness to the parents in the room, but to prioritize what is necessary for the children, meaning at different developmental stages, different children need different parents for different amounts of time. And so this weird idea of, King Solomon's baby, where the mothers, the story of King Solomon, where the 2 mothers come in and say, this is my baby. And the other mother says, well, this is my baby. And the king says, okay, guard, come over here, bring your sword, cut the baby in half. Which of you wants the top and which of you wants the bottom? And one mother steps forward and says, no, don't touch a hair on that child's head. Give the baby to her. And the king says, well, you're the real mother. And so generally the parent that's willing to sacrifice for the child is the parent who is the real parent. I guess you could say, step forward. You have to make a lot of sacrifices. At moments it doesn't feel fair to you, and you know what, it isn't. Because
Yeah.
babies aren't possessions. They're not to be split 50-50 like a sandwich. They aren't sandwiches. They aren't loaves of bread. You can't just split them evenly in half. I think the whole idea of, 2 nights here and 2 nights there and 3 nights, the 2-2-3, or it treats children like they're a sack of potatoes, to be perfectly honest. And children hate it, and they're going to hate you if you put upon them this paradigm. So I really kind of talk a lot in the book about how this idea of treating children like possession to be split 50-50 is really not a good idea for children.
Well, you brought up so many good points. Where do we begin? As a mediator, I have to do a lot of educating. Many
Yeah.
people aren't aware of how the courts perceive things. And again, that isn't legal advice, it's just reality. But the courts typically, and most judges in most counties, in most states, in most countries are looking out for the best interest of the children, right? As that is their initial spiel, mantra, a theme song. They really feel that they're looking out for the best interests of the children. Going back to these studies, I think most of them were in the 60s and 70s. You would probably know better than I. The exact studies, and they change and are updated as time goes on. But most of these studies are stating that children do better when, long term, when the child has an equal opportunity to foster a relationship with both parents. They don't necessarily use the word equal time, but they do usually use the word foster, an opportunity to have accessibility and a strong relationship with both parents. And there's a lot of, validity to that. I mean, who doesn't, as a parent, want your children, a child or children, to have a strong relationship with both yourself and the other parent, rather that be the father or the mother of the child. I've never had anybody admit, at least in court, that they don't want their children to have a relationship with the other parent. I have been behind closed doors, Erica. That I will admit, she's a blank and he's a this and she did that and he did that. So therefore, they don't deserve to have a relationship with the child, And I usually step back at that point and say, I wouldn't air that emotion in court. I mean, that's something you might want to say to your lawyer or your therapist or a BFF or something, or me. But I don't think that one, she's shaking her head if you're listening to the audio. But you do also have to remember, or I learned that those studies were done with healthy situations or not so dysfunctional situations where both parents were, communicative and respectful of each other and, decent human beings. I'm not saying that everyone divorcing isn't a decent human being. As you mentioned, criminal court is typically bad people on their best behavior, and family law is typically decent, good people on their worst behavior. It brings out the worst in people. But behind closed doors, sometimes that rush of emotion or that revenge factor comes in about they're not deserving of it. But back to the court, they typically do want to look at a 28-day calendar and say, okay, 14 days for mom, 14 days with dad, and how do we divvy up the 14 days? Not always, but that is a trend in the United States and Canada and beyond. So to your point, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Of like, especially in those formative years of that, they're not a sack of potatoes to bring
There
up.
used to be a policy called the tender years policy, which was in its own way a way to recognize, in my generation, a way to recognize that that the early years children needed their mothers more if their mothers were the primary attachment figure. And I think the kind of feminist movement and how there's
Sure.
this push to say women and men are exactly the same and mothers and fathers are interchangeable and fungible, not at all different to children. And it sort of changed the narrative, and not necessarily for the better. It may have been too mother-centric and that fathers weren't nearly as valued as they are today. Now I think fathers are valued actually in some cases more than mothers. I mean, so I have people all over the country come to me to do expert testimony in cases where breastfeeding children under the age of 3 who sleep with their mothers for attachment security are being taken away for half of the week for overnights. Breastfeeding has to be stopped because the father insists upon, or whoever is the non-attachment figure, parent insists upon, it's only fair to them that they have half of the time. And what they don't realize is by doing that, they're actually damaging their child. And so this is what I mean by it's not always fair to the grown-ups in the room what's best for the children. Yeah, and the concept, the old concept was that children had a stable primary residence, even though parents could have equal access to them. So whoever was the non-primary, custodial parent would have, access to them after school or dinners with them, and it still works this way. In the healthiest of cases that I have, children live during the week when they are in school in one home, and then they go to the other parent on weekends. What this does is it gives them a sense of stability during the week when they're in school. So they're not, I want every adult listening to this to think about what it would be like for you to have to move house every 2 days. Where is your teddy bear? Where is the book that you love? Where is your favorite shirt that you cling to? You're basically disrupting children's lives in such a way that I challenge any adult to think about how it might be socialized. And so it really is projecting onto children that they can manage much more than they actually. One of the healthiest divorces cases that I ever worked on is the case of a father with 3 little girls. Can you still hear me? Because there's a lot of noise.
Yeah, it just got a little muffled. I was checking the Wi-Fi signal, and it still seems very strong. But
because there was like almost street sounds I heard.
yeah, I live in the middle of the country, so
I know, that was really weird. It was almost like it picked up. You're going to edit this out. It picked up
yes,
on
of course.
like we had a party line. I felt like we just had a party. I don't
I
know if you
thought so too. I was like, is there somebody else on the line? I didn't know if maybe somebody walked in the
street
room
sound.
or something.
Anyway, okay.
Yeah, he can edit this all out around 18 minutes.
Okay. Should
So
I
we'll just pick that
get
up
that
again.
story again? Okay. Yeah. So the healthiest case I ever worked on was of a family that were divorcing. Somewhat amicable. There were 3 little girls, and the father very generously said, these 3 little girls are really little and they need their mom, and their mommy was their primary caregiver at that point. The father worked really hard. And he said, I'm okay with the girls staying with you during the week, and I'll take them from Friday afternoon until Sunday morning. And that's the way they did it, and it worked. And when one of the girls, who was really little, wasn't ready to do overnights at their daddy's, he said, that's okay, I can wait. I'm not in a rush. When you're ready, you'll come and join your sisters. Until then, you can stay with your mom. So it was all about, that's a very good example of putting your children first. And he would see his children during the week. He would come and pick them up from school and take them out for dinner, and they would do sort of fake sleepovers where they wouldn't sleep over, but they would stay until 8, and then he would bring them back. They'd have dinner with him. So it's not as if he didn't have access to them, but he didn't force them to come and stay in his home and to possess them. They're mine now. They have to be in my realm, and they're mine, sort of like precious, sort of like, Lord of the Rings. And so I think that's probably the best example I can give of kind of sacrificing and being generous. And now these girls love their father and they understand the sacrifices that he made. And he never abandoned them. He just understood what they needed and let them kind of get what they needed from their mother. And then when they got older and they were adolescents, they ended up spending more time with him, you know. And so it's the marshmallow test, Paulette. You know the marshmallow test from the 70s? The marshmallow test was a man came in a room with some 8-year-old children, and he said, I'll give you the marshmallow. I'll give you one marshmallow now, all of you children. But if you can wait till I go out of the room and go to the bathroom and come back, I'll give you 3 marshmallows. The kids who could wait for the 3 marshmallows longitudinally, this research, did the best in school. They did the best social, emotionally, and relationally. They did the best with frustration tolerance. So I think we're in a state where people cannot wait. They can't do what's right for their children, even if it involves a little bit of waiting and patience and faith.
Yeah. Well, we call that, a gratification delay. People have a difficult time. I want an Oompa Loompa now, I call it. I call it the Veruca factor.
Right now, Daddy.
I want an Oompa Loompa now, Daddy. And then he says, Mr. Wonka, how much for the Oompa Loompa? And, he's feeding into the little disease over here, the child from hell. But anyway, we digress with my childhood of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Well, as a mediator, again, back to educating when I'm in the middle of it with the 2 parties and we're trying to work out the parenting plan. Oh, we could just get into legal custody too, because that's where you can initially see the decision making of who really wants to arm wrestle and tug of war and who hasn't got to acceptance, letting go and surrender. They're still stuck in negotiating and bargaining and trying to see who's boss and get the upper hand, because the court has made it so that there are 4 categories. And well, luckily so, mom gets to and dad gets to in most situations, but not always. And I can attest the water. I always do legal custody before physical custody as a little bit of a litmus test. But then we get into this schedule, the 28-day schedule. Are the minor children with one parent all 28 days? Sometimes, if they're in the military or they're traveling extensively, maybe they get a significant amount of time in the summer, school vacations, holidays, but that structure of school, academia, homework, extracurricular, religion, structure, routine, I have seen that works really well. It does take a bit of surrendering on one parent's part of acquiescing that responsibility or control to the other parent. It's very unique. I see it maybe 10% of the time. But what happens is that the mediation turns when the topic of money or child support comes into it. Yeah, because if the child support are equal share, equal time, equal involvement, equal pay, meaning, one person's making 100, one's making 110, or, it's comparable. It's not like one's making 20 and one's making 2 million. But if there's a relatively similar income, relatively similar timeshare, relatively similar involvement, even Steven, as they say, right? And sometimes that works out well, particularly if they're 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and mom and dad both get to see the kids at sports or ballet or school or holiday time. They're still able to do that. But as soon as the party realizes or learns, depending on the state, that they have to pay more child support or there's less child support, if there's more or less time, then it's not only as emotional, but it's financial. And that's when they start to fight.
I find that to be the problem, at least in New York State, that custody arrangements are connected to finances, because basically what people are doing is I hate to say they're selling and commoditizing their children, right? They're making their children into commodities.
Sure.
To be traded.
I'll get an extra $1,000 if I have them more or less, or whatever the situation is. I'm not pointing fingers at mom or dad. It's the, energy dichotomy of the whole thing, but you're so right. And that's really tricky, to look at. I usually try to come back to reality of that child support is only for food, clothing, and shelter for the children. It's for the children. It isn't, and you're both going to have to pay for their groceries and their clothing and their, extracurricular, I don't know, equipment and regardless. So I usually try to be a little solution oriented where we try to figure out not so much what the court's mandating, but what is it that the children need, and looking at that budget, shall we say, and then saying, okay, let's say you're spending $2,000 a month on the children. Are you both contributing $1,000? Maybe. Not everyone can do that. I'm obviously just giving you a hypothetical example here because math is not my idea of a good time. So, and most say, yeah, that it would be fair, or 1,505, or whatever the number is, and whether that pro rata share is, that they put those funds in a joint account. They both have access to it. So the children also are not hearing, oh, well, your father is buying that or your mother paid for that. It's that we are paying for it. We are buying you your birthday cake, or depending on the age of the child, a new tennis racket or whatever they need. So it isn't so much about one parent against the other. You're not pitting one against the other. It's still, even though we're divorcing, it's still a mutual connection and contribution. May not be exactly 50-50, but both parties are partaking in the raising and the finances. So there's ways to get around that are still acceptable to the court. And the court really knows or wants to know that the children are provided for. That's their ultimate concern.
I mean, I'll give you an example of what we're talking about with a case that I worked on. The mother was a stay-at-home mother, or worked very little, and the father worked very intensely. And the father insisted on having the children 50% of the time, even though he put them in daycare,
Yep.
just so he could pay less to the mother.
Very
It wasn't that he even wanted to spend time with the children. He'd rather put them in daycare, which puts them at risk, because I write books and write articles, and I write for the Wall Street Journal and about why daycare is not good for children. And so a parent would rather see their child put into a less than ideal care situation just so they have to pay less to their spouse. And that's what I mean by selfishness.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by narcissism. And when you've lost your perspective on what you're doing it for anyway. Because if you're going to do what's right for your children, you wouldn't put them in daycare. You would let the parent who could care for them care for them. If you have to travel and it's your time, when you work amicably and you're co-parenting amicably, you ask the other parent, would you mind taking our child because I have to travel for a few days for work? You don't put your child into daycare or get another person who's that child feels much less comfortable with to stay with them. I mean, it just is such common sense emotionally. It's like social emotional common sense. And I feel like people have lost their social emotional common sense.
Well, you did mention the narcissism word, and I sort of summed that up with a little bit of education for people, what I call the 3 E's of lack of empathy, entitlement, and exploitation. And all of that is really a matter of those 3. Really, they really don't care about how the other person thinks or feels. It's all about what's convenient for them or more beneficial for them. And they know there are rules, but they don't apply to them. And they're going to use people and places and systems to benefit them. So it's a way of controlling their partner. I'm going to control you with money. I'm going to control you with time. And also not even just daycare, but having a nanny or a live-in au pair when the other parent is available, that is sort of the ultimate slap in the face, Now things do change a little bit when the children become teenagers and they get their driver's license and they're able to, be a little bit more independent and go back and forth between parents, as long as it's overseen, because that's when they get into trouble and they start lying and say, oh, I'm going to dad's when they're really going to their friend's house, or I'm going to go spend the weekend with mom when they're really, going to hang out with their girlfriend or whatever. So they can get into trouble. Teenagers will always pit one against the other and always try to have the good parent, bad parent, Disney dad, Disney mom syndrome. So it's very wise for both parties to communicate, even if you don't really get along with this ex-parent so well. I think it's a smart idea to still keep that line of communication, even if it's on a co-parenting app, because those kids can get in more trouble than you realize. So let's talk a little bit about your book. How is it structured? Is it for all ages? Is it structured through the process of divorce? Is it more post-divorce? Kind of break it down for people who are curious about the structure of your book.
I mean, it basically is I hate to say it's a soup to nuts book for parents on divorce. So it deals with all age ranges.
Okay.
It also deals with, if you're thinking about divorce, how to think about it in terms of how to do it in the healthiest way, how to talk to your children about divorce. It's sort of the do's and don'ts in terms of how to talk to your children. And then it goes through what I call the worst sins that parents make. A lot of my adult patients have been so scarred by their parents' divorce that even as adults are still talking about what their parents did that was so traumatic and damaging to them. And so, some of those things I talk about in the book in terms of what are some of what I call sand traps that you should avoid in divorces to avoid really traumatizing your children. So that's basically how it's structured.
Perfect. They can sort of go into it based on where they're at and how old their children are versus kind of going through the weeds. That's always helpful because
Yeah.
divorce is overwhelming. And I always find that the less bombardment they have with homework and to-dos and research, the better. It's not easy even in the best situations. Although I have seen some beautiful success stories. Way back when my kids were 1, 3, and 5, one of our neighbors had 6 children, 7 children, and the oldest name was Sarah. And she was at that perfect 16-year-old, 15-year-old age to babysit. And I said, "Oh, Sarah, would you love to babysit?" And I would sometimes just not bring the 1, 3, and the 5-year-old to the grocery store. It would be much easier to have a 15-year-old there playing with the 3 kids while I could go in the grocery store and be gone in an hour versus 3 hours with them. Every mother's nodding their head, I know. So she was so wonderful. I fell madly in love with her, and it was just such a great relationship. She babysat for 10, 15 years, and she's now married and has kids and lives right down the street from where my ex lives, crazy enough. But back in the story, I had no idea that her parents were divorced. None. She lived with her mom, but the dad was always there, and it took me 2 years to know that her family was divorced. I was like, what? Your parents are divorced? She's like, oh yeah, they haven't been married in, the youngest child, I think she was 1 or 2 at the time. So it had been a while, but I was dumbfounded, and she was the first person that taught me that divorce could be done well, or co-parenting could be done well.
Yeah.
I didn't really get into the weeds of their divorce, but I knew. I said, you know what? She was hope, a beacon of light. Even the fact that she was so adjusted and healthy, and so were the other children. So they were all just like very normal and great kids and responsible and good students. And I thought, okay, there's hope, right? If they can do it, anyone can do it. It's not easy, but it takes determination, commitment to the children. And as you said beautifully, Erica, it is a bit of an inconvenience, and you do have to prioritize the children. And unfortunately, some parents are willing to do that and some are not. So you have to sort of look at the cards that you're dealt and manage that wisely and get some professional advice and, reading books and working with an expert, someone like Erica that can guide you. And, you can't control your ex-spouse to be, you can't change them. You can only be responsibility for your actions and your reaction to them. So be careful not to let them provoke you. That can be very easy too, is to engage in arguments. So I write a little bit about that too in Better Divorce Blueprint. And sometimes it's what you don't say that's better than what you say, and using your children as a therapist is never a good idea. So that's why we have professionals. So it's tempting when you have a teenager too to tell them too much because they're very inquisitive. Like, why are you and mom divorcing? What happened? How come you broke up? Like, what happened? Who did what to whom? And all of a sudden, before you know it, you're on the witness stand with your children, and you go, wait, this isn't right. So it's important. I advise everyone to get her book. And what's the best way for people to learn more about you and follow you and, dare I say, stalk you? Don't mean it that way in a bad way, but, learn more about your work and what you do and share that with us.
So it's www.komisar, my last name, KOMISAR.com. And on my website, you can get the links to buying the book, or you could just go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble. But you also can see a lot of the podcast interviews. I've been on a lot of podcasts and a lot of the articles I've written. And so, yeah, it's all there. And you can also follow me on Instagram, Erica Komisar, and on Twitter. I'm also on Twitter. So, yeah. So anybody, you can find all of that on my website.
Perfect. Website's the way to go. Well, thank you. This is a really enlightening conversation for many, I know, myself included. Now that I'm a grandmother, it's always interesting to kind of look at how children develop in an early age. So, I taught ballet for many years, and I never wanted to teach the 3-year-olds. I didn't want to start until they were 5 because I knew I myself didn't have the personality or demeanor. I was like, they have to be toilet trained and they have to know right from left. But once they were, we had other teachers in the school that were fabulous at those children. I myself was like, everybody's different, but when it came to my own children, like, it was different, when you're in a room of 24 3-year-olds versus that aren't yours, versus your own little ones.
I think that's important to remember too when you're handing your child over to strangers, and even
Yes.
if they're loving strangers, it's not you. And so I think
Sure.
that's really
Yeah.
they're not going to have the same investment in your child as you do. Good thing
Yeah,
to-
I really did deeply connect with all of my students teaching. But you have to also know what you're good at teaching,
Yeah.
what style, what age, what subject matter, and knowing that, because it's such a nuanced field, whether that be, coaching. But when it comes to your own kids, it's different. It really is different. And but working with an expert such as yourself who can bring you down off the ledge when you're on that emotional edge of pulling out your hair and wanting to scream and say something perhaps you'll regret. So good time to do it. And anyone who's struggling with, litigation and would like to consider avoiding all that, you know how to find me, Paulette at betterdivorceacademy.com, and the website, of course, betterdivorceacademy.com. Thank you so much for this, and until next time, everyone, keep making it better. That's the alternative to making it worse. You got this. See you soon. Bye.